martial law. One-sided. It is a big idea. Propagandists from a new world order.
With skillful manipulating of the press, they're able to make the victim look like the criminal, and the criminal look like the victim.
We love what's happening.
We're here preliminarily that the first strike
America,
was
we
success
can do it.
I welcome you to Make It Plain TV.
Fighting this, people always think you can't fight the banks and you can't fight the system. But when the foreclosure epidemic first started, the first thing we raised in 2007, when the foreclosure epidemic started, is actually Granholm, if you remember, was going around the state doing these town hall meetings about how bad the economic crisis. Well, I got into one of them, and during the meeting, she asked, gave all these things about how Detroit, Michigan had been hit with all the industry shutting down and all this stuff. So she opened it up and said, well, what would you do if you were governor? And then she called on me, and I said, the first thing I would do is declare a state of economic emergency, because we have a combination of both an economic crisis that's dispossessing people as well as the predatory lending in the cities. And that if you declare an economic emergency, there's historic precedent that you could put a moratorium on all foreclosures. And in fact, in the 1930s, we had a 5-year moratorium on foreclosures. They could not foreclose. And it was upheld by both the Michigan Supreme Court and by the U.S. Supreme Court. There's a famous case, Home Loan Association versus Blaisdell, and it's still good law. It's never been overturned. It said in a period of crisis, the right of the people to survive supersedes the contract clause of the Constitution. Well, I raised it to Granholm in 2007. Now imagine if she put a moratorium on in 2007. How many homes? Detroit wouldn't look like it does now.
There is one person who lost their house in October of last year's auction. The new owner started saying, well, just pay me rent. And then they had the rent so high that she couldn't, she's on a fixed income. This is one where she had been trying for 3 years to get Step Forward. Step Forward, of course, is part of the TARP funds again, right? That came because of the result of the predatory lending. And then she was eligible for poverty exemption. She shouldn't have even been paying taxes on the house. 68 years old. Second generation house, been in her family since 1954. Her dad was the first African American music teacher in the Detroit public school system. He trained the likes of Howland Dozier and Howland, which wrote all the hits for Motown. And a number of, he was music director at C.L. Franklin's church in Black Bottom. And she had no place to go. 68 years old, no place to go. No, I mean, literally had been trying for months to get a Section 8 voucher, not available in Detroit. Plymouth was the closest agency, could not get the voucher for Plymouth, couldn't get it for all of the other cities, including West Bloomfield, which she applied for. And had no place to go. And a week before they were about to throw her out in the street, we found her a place to go just by the grace of God and a good Samaritan. And we have a wave of people coming just like that. And to think about the epic proportions of elderly people that are going to be thrown out into the street is sickening. I mean, it's sickening.
By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the city was beginning to recover a little bit. Not until to where it was, but there was a recovery. I bought a home in 2002 in East English Village, and the value I paid double what homes had been selling for 10 years before in that neighborhood. And there was certainly a stabilization. And throughout it all, throughout this tremendous attack and deindustrialization in Detroit, Detroit still was a center for homeownership. and it had the highest homeownership rate of any city in the country, and particularly for African Americans. The neighborhoods, we had always had great neighborhoods. They were filled with nice homes that you could buy at a reasonable rate. And so it was a place where people could actually own a home, where in most cities they were excluded by the value of real estate.
Detroit was definitely a target for predatory lending. This is not solely my personal opinion. Senator Carl Levin, in April of 2011, when he was in the federal Senate, he did a Senate investigative report on the foreclosure crisis. He clearly articulates Detroit was one of the urban cities that was targeted for predatory lending. People who really shouldn't have been put in subprime loans were put in subprime loans, meaning that they may have had the adequate credit score to be in a prime loan, but people of color in urban cities were targeted for these types of loans. And in the end, they knew these loans were going to default. And in the end, the borrower was the one that's left holding the bag because everybody else got bailed out, paid off, whatever.
And what that was about was really the banks came up with a new scheme. I think they had kind of maxed out credit cards by that way, so they were coming up with a new scheme to interject money in a stagnant economy. And they said, here's was their scheme, is that they would allow people to refinance their homes with no checking on the homes, artificially inflating the value of the homes, and selling loans to people that they knew they wouldn't be able to pay. And many of them were in Detroit. What we saw primarily were adjustable rate loans on subprime mortgages. So they would sell a loan that already started with a pretty high interest rate, but at least was affordable to the person. Or sometimes they would give them a teaser rate, even a low rate for a year or two. They would lure people in, tell them, don't worry but the rate would adjust. And in Detroit, the adjustable rates were extraordinary. They would adjust from up to 10, 12, 14% within a 2 or 3 year period. And they were selling these loans to senior citizens on fixed income who they knew couldn't pay them.
Right now is a senior who also has significant health issues, on dialysis 3 times a week, has some cancer treatment, had a stroke. They're just looking to get the loan modified, things of that nature. Well, they started the process, and the mortgage company actually sent her a letter that said, we will not foreclose on your home while we're reviewing you for a modification. They sold her home the next week.
I have one lady that had 4 careers. She's old. She's 96 years old. She had 4 separate careers. 4 separate careers. She lives next door to me. 4 separate careers, and I paid into the system this whole time, and now you're telling me that all of this lifetime of work in supporting the city, in my very time of need, you can't give anything back to me. And just that story in itself, and then we take and multiply that through every city throughout the United States.
Senior citizens who didn't even make it through the fight. They have strokes and die along the way because they're so stressed out about losing their homes after being there 30, 40, or 50 years. So it turned into a situation where, for me and my clients, it's not just an economic number. It's actually a quality of life and sometimes a life and death situation. And no one tends to view it from this perspective from the mainstream media or mainstream financial institutions, or even from the judiciary for that matter. What's going on with housing in Detroit is that, contrary to the mainstream media, the foreclosure crisis is not over for Detroit. And I mean mortgage foreclosure. It's only compounded with the tax foreclosures, and people are still losing their homes at an alarming rate.
And many people blame the people for this, but in fact, this was an orchestrated effort by the banks. They trained brokers to go into neighborhoods. They trained them to sell these loans. They reassured people, don't worry, if it adjusts, you'll just be able to refinance. They artificially put a value on the homes that had nothing to do with the real value of the homes. And a lot of people again say, well, people shouldn't have gotten sucked in. But this was a very orchestrated attack. And really, one of the best documentations of it is the Senate Select Committee report on Wall Street and the financial crisis that lays it out. It reads like The Godfather. And this is the government laying it out. And it was done with the sanction of the ratings agencies. The ratings agencies, the same ones who later would put Detroit into default, would rate, because what happened was when the banks would sell these loans, and Quicken Loan, of course, Gilbert was one of the main originators of them. He always says he's not involved in foreclosure. He wrote the loans and then turned them over to the banks. And what they would do then, package them as security instruments, sell them on the investment market, and Moody's and Standard & Poor's would rate them AAA, knowing they were no good, because they got paid to do so by the banks. They made record profits. The banks made record profits. Everyone was doing great except the people were getting screwed. And eventually, of course, the bubble burst. And the thing I want to emphasize is some people say, which banks were the ones that did it? My answer is every bank did it. And truthfully, credit unions did it too. And why did they do it? Because the rate of profits when they sold these subprime mortgage instruments on the market was 8 times higher than when they packaged fixed rate instruments. 8 times higher. That's out of the select committee report. So, it was irresistible. The profit was like this huge profit that they were 8 times greater profit than they used to make on the traditional fixed rate mortgage, where someone, got a rate, they paid the rate for years, and then they owned their home. It changed everything.
These foreclosures could cause a lot more, but even through all the drug wars, the gangs and the rapid deindustrial, and when I say rapid, I'm talking 100 mile an hour deindustrialization of the city, which ultimately set up the poverty, which ultimately brought in the drugs, which ultimately caused the housing and predatory lending. So we're talking about predatory lending. So we get into the predatory lending thing, and as the people started to naturally leave Russell Woods. So for example, my grandmother, who was 85 years old when we moved her out, and the other people that had moved in there in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, as they left, the backfill population was people that were getting these predatory loans to be able to afford these houses at $125,000 in 2005, 2006, 2004 era. So during that boom time, when the neighborhood was naturally turning over because of the age of the residents in the neighborhood, we had the people that came in, paid good money for those houses, right? Wanting to live in Russell Woods and wanting to preserve the culture and the legacy of Russell Woods, move in with predatory loans, and then over 40% of them ended up going into foreclosure.
What was called the Making Home Affordable program. That's the first program to talk about. And that was the program that was supposed to offer loan modifications, and it did to some extent, to people who were you had very high interest rates, you get modifications. But of course, they put so many impediments on it. And the most important impediment is that it was operated by the same banks who were foreclosing on you. So in other words, if you wanted to get a modification, the government, you didn't go to the government, you went to your loan servicer or the bank who served the mortgage company, and you had to get them to do it. Well, of course, that's not their interest. They make more money on foreclosure, so they had no real incentive to do it. And what would happen was, so even though they announced this program that ostensibly should have given relief, what happened was, because it was run by the banks and the government had no supervision over the program, it was pretty much a failure.
And despite everyone believing that the federal stopgap, the modification program somehow helped this, it has not. In many ways, it's exacerbated the problem because it gives people a sense of false security. Because under the program, they're not supposed to refer homes to foreclosure while they're reviewing people for modifications. But literally what they're doing is using that as a sense of false security. And while people are sending in documents 5, 10, 15 times, they're steadily moving the house to foreclosure. When someone applies for a modification, the bank is paid incentives. In fact, the federal government entered into what they call servicer participation contracts. And these servicer participation contracts earmarked hundreds of millions of dollars for the banks to review loans, and that's very important to understand that term, review loans for modification. So I can ask you to send my paperwork in 50 times because apparently we don't have a complete modification package. And that still permits me to collect under my service participation contract. And at the end of the day, I don't send you any response or say you're not eligible or whatever and still foreclose on your home, and then turn around after getting money for the modification review process, foreclose the home, and get reimbursed for the outstanding mortgage balance. The next thing people know, particularly here in Michigan, where we are a foreclosure by advertisement state, they have something posted on their door saying, hey, your house is going to a sheriff's sale. In foreclosure by advertisement, just so that we're clear, there is not a judicial proceeding before the house is foreclosed and sold at the sheriff's sale. It is literally a posting on the door, and then the house is sold. And at that point, you're divested of all your legal rights to the property. The only thing that remains are the equitable rights for redemption. And to be clear, those equitable rights for redemption, in some instances, is not a right at all, because that's the right to be able to go in and pay the full mortgage off. And in reality, if someone's trying to get a modification and has had difficulty trying to pay their mortgage, what is the likelihood that they can go in and pay off the whole mortgage? And banks really don't have a lot of incentive to really push for the modifications, because most of the loans that were considered toxic, quote unquote, are now insured by the federal government, so they're reimbursed for the loan balances when the home's going to foreclosure. So you may have a home worth market value in Detroit at $10,000, a mortgage of $100,000. In many ways, it is more lucrative to foreclose and to get the mortgage balance, or parts thereof from the federal government than it is to work with the homeowner. The Federal Consumer Finance Bureau was created to try to give greater oversight over the consumer issues, specifically with mortgages. With respect to the area of mortgages and mortgage foreclosure, no one's coming in here saying, hey, look at the sheer volume of these foreclosures, something should be wrong. I've had numerous clients that have made complaints to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and basically they say, okay, we'll send us your information, and they send it to the bank, and the bank responds, well, we reviewed them, or it's in litigation, or whatever the case may be. And there's never really any investigation as to what went on.
We have over 40,000 people homeless in the city of Detroit. Nobody's talking about it, and we're about to push 100,000 people, literally out.
I've been homeless for 1 year.
8 years. For 2 years now.
I really don't call this homeless because it's my home. You know what I'm saying? I've been on the streets for like 20 years.
But when the foreclosure epidemic first started, the first thing we raised.
I had got locked up in the county jail.
Because my mother passed.
I got out the county jail, I didn't have nowhere to go, so they told me about the shelters downtown. So I went to the shelters downtown, but you can only stay there for 90 days.
After my house burnt down, I moved back from Colorado, and I was on drugs for a little while, and I went to rehab. I got off drugs, and then, after my mom died, I've been struggling, trying to find a job, can't find a job, I've been working odd jobs here and there, but it don't pay no bills or nothing, so I just eat and sleep outside.
Drugs has something to do with it, but it's not the major problem.
Alcohol is the main reason why people out here. Drugs, if people get a little money, every money they get is going on the drug, how they gonna ever get a place to live? Marijuana, crack, alcohol.
Crack cocaine and beer. I stay in an abandoned building.
Down at Hart Plaza.
I live in abandoned Brewsters of the row houses. I have a mattress with the box spring on crates.
Everything I own, I carry with me. It's just this. And my Bible I got in my pocket.
They sleep at the sewer to keep heat. The steam that comes up out the sewer, they sleep right there to keep heated. They're right there. It's about 3 or 4 guys right now. Sleep on the streets, on the sidewalk.
Well, my day begins where I get up in the morning and I leave the shelter at 6 o'clock. I go out and try to find temporary jobs, but I try to make sure I get a few dollars in my pocket so in case I need to eat, because I might miss the shelter if I do get a job.
We get up in the morning, we need a shelter. 6 o'clock in the morning, we walk down the street. We go from Burger King to the library. You know, those are the places that we can frequent. Most places don't have public bathroom for us to use. But you know, sometimes we urinate or whatever, defecate on the streets, but we do.
You can't eat. You have to get out, take a shower, go to shelters and things like that to take a shower. You know, they have monks right down the way there, and that's where I go take my showers at. Other than that, I'm just on the streets and I'm living.
The hardest thing is being able to get the city to try to help them. The city needs to help the homeless, because the simple fact is, if they don't help the homeless, it creates another problem for the city of Detroit. It puts people out on the street to the point where they might do anything to try to get food, shelter, or whatever.
Me, I make money mostly like working for the people at the parking lots. Every Tiger game, Red Wing game, the white people come from the suburbs, give you money, feed you.
If you guys help the homeless, it'd be highly appreciated.
I was homeless in California, met Ice Cube, and I was in an Ice Cube video called Check Yourself Before You Wreck Yourself. I played a gangster at first in jail, then at the end of the video I played Twan. Used to be the Don Juan, now your name is Swan. That's a gay guy character, you know.
Try to make it day-to-day life as comfortable as we can. It's not fair. Life is not fair. We never said it was. God never said it was.
I like to read my Bible because I know there is a God, and I know that He is going to bring me up out of this, and I got faith in Him.
People look at me, they look down on me. But you know what? It don't stop me from living or moving or progressing. Why? Is because I have no problem with being who I am and doing what I do.
It was the best thing happened to me in case I get a big job, lose my job, I ain't gonna jump off the bridge and commit suicide. Most of the people from the suburbs, they lose their job, they gonna commit suicide because they can't handle the streets.
I need a hug every once in a while to be me, to be loved. Thank you, sir.
The problem with violence is that we have never been violent. We have been too non-violent.
There's no such thing as a non-violent revolution. The only kind of revolution that's non-violent is the Negro revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro revolution. That's no revolution. A revolution is loving. Revolution is hostile. Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. And you sitting around here like a knot on the wall saying I'm going to love these folks no matter how much they hate me.
You call us savages and beasts and mad dogs running the street burning and looting, but we're doing this not for the destruction of the world, but we're trying to prove one point. We want freedom and justice and equality. We want to be treated equal. The best thing to do is give us freedom or come at this place a riot with blood.
Here in Detroit, a city of war.
This channel is dedicated to bringing truth to power and engaging our enemy with intellectual warfare. The dominant society will never switch up their playbook, so we must make a new one. The war we find ourselves in is a technological war, using technology, propaganda, and psyops to oppress and control you. Black intelligentsia, please share the new black media, counter propaganda arms, make it plain TV.
No killing what can't be killed.